Now we're going to take a look at solving by a method called completing the square. And this is a method dealing with our standard form equation, ax squared plus bx plus c, and it should be equal to 0. What we're going to be doing first is it says move c to the other side. So that's this c right here. It's going to move to the other side by usually subtracting it. Okay, and then you're going to take your b, we're talking about this b right here, dividing whatever that number is by 2 and squaring it, in other words b over 2 squared. We add that solution to both sides, and that's what you can see is happening here and here. You can see right here is where there's that negative c that got moved to the other side. And then you're going to factor and solve by taking the square root. So we're using the square root method that we learned in our last lesson in this particular lesson. But we're going to be breaking this into individual parts. For example, these first problems that you're going to be asked is it's just going to simply say, what number do you need to add to both sides to complete the square? Well, all that's asking you to do is step 2. That's all it's asking you. That's the big question for what do you add to both sides. Okay? And that's just b over 2 squared. B over 2 squared. That's the big critical step. So you just take your 4, divide it by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then you square that. And that's 4. That's the number that you add to both sides. So the answer is 4 for this first problem. Second problem, same thing. B is 5. Take your 5, divide it by 2, and you square it. Now this time it's not an easy number, but you should take 5 divided by 2 squared. You don't want to give me the decimal, you just want to give me 5 squared. By the way, how you square a fraction is you multiply it. You square the top and you square the bottom. So really this is just 25 over 4. 25 over 4. Okay? And that is your answer for these questions that say just what do you add to both sides. Now we've got to do more work when it says complete the square, or solve using completing the square is what this should actually say. So now we've got to go through the whole process. So the first thing that we need to do is move our c. Okay? So we take this 10 and subtract the 10 to the other side. And we get x squared plus 8x, leave a space, equals negative 10. Okay? Now, so where we're at is, we just did step 1. Now we're doing step 2. Step 2 is to take our b and divide it by 2 and square it. So we go ahead and take our 8, divide it by 2, which would be 4. So I'll do it off the side. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then I square that. So 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16. So this is step 3 now. Add the solution to both sides. So I add the 16 to both sides. Okay? So now what it says is we're going to factor and then solve. So let's factor first. So what I'm talking about factoring is this left-hand side should factor. And it's going to factor, you could use the magic x, but it would be a long process. It's going to factor really nicely. It's going to be x in both, and then just whatever the square, whatever the b was, divided by 2. So we're just going to take and add 4 to both parentheses. So all you have to do is just have your x, whatever the number was in the middle, whatever the number over here on the side was before you squared it, that's the number that's going to go right down in here in the parentheses. Now it's the same parentheses twice, so what we actually want is that parentheses written once with a square. And then that's equal to, you just simplify the right hand side, 6. This is why our last step says solve by taking the square root, because every time you solve by this completing the square method, you should have a square root at the end, or a square at the end that you need to square root to get rid of. So to finish, we just square root, and we get x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 6. So to have my final solution, I subtract my 4, and I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 6. It's your final solution. Let's try another one. On this one, we have to move our c again first. So we add our 1 to the other side. Rewrite this to be x squared plus 7x. Leave a space, equals 1. Now, our next step is to take our b, which is 7, divide it by 2, and square it. Okay, so I'm going to add 7 halves. or sorry, add 7 halves. It's got to square it first. Add 49 over 4. Okay, and now I know a lot of us are going to get uncomfortable right now because we don't like 49 over 4. But it's okay because I said last time you only need this number when you factor. So our next step is to factor. I just need one parentheses squared, because it's going to be the same thing in both parentheses, x plus whatever this number was in the middle, which is 7 halves, equals, this is the little bit of a hard part, I need to add 1 and 49 over 4, but thankfully 1 is just 4 over 4. So 4 fourths plus 49 fourths should give you 53 fourths. And then to finish, I just have to square root both sides. And I get x plus 7 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 53 over 4. That part is just a little bit ugly, but remember, when we have a square root of a fraction, you can take the square root of the 53 over the square root of the 4. So we should write the square root of 53 over 2. Okay? So let me rewrite this. So I should have x plus 7 halves equals square root of 50, plus or minus, sorry, square root of 53 over 2. Okay? And now to finish, I just subtract my 7 halves and I get x equals negative 7 halves plus or minus the square root of 53. Sorry, I ran out of room there. Let's try it again. 53 over 2. Okay? So this is your answer. Now this problem may have got a little confusing for you because of the fractions. Rewind it, try it again, listen to the steps that I'm saying, because it's the same steps that we had at the very beginning, right here. I just did it with a fraction. Okay? And notice on the second problem I talked about, it's the number in the middle that goes down here. Remember, there's 2 parentheses, and it turned into 1, okay, right here, squared. So the same thing happened on the second problem. I just skipped that step where you had 2 parentheses right here, and I saved ourselves a little space and just wrote 1 parentheses squared. Okay? So try it again, see if it makes sense, and then work that out in your classwork. If all else fails, you could also solve by the magic x if it factors, but these particular ones don't factor with the magic x. That's why we've got this new method. Later we'll learn the quadratic formula, and you can always use the quadratic formula.